Today's episode is brought to you by Positively Productive Systems, whose mission is to be the antidote to your stress and to provide compassionate productivity resources and coaching that help you heal and achieve. Be sure to check out both free and paid resources at positivelyproductive.com/resources.
I think we get hung up with all of the stuff that other people think we should do or that was generated for them. Like the media and the government and big business wants you to keep making more money and keep spending more money and to keep ratcheting this thing up. But none of that says you'll be happier. You won't actually be happier when you ratchet it up a notch. You just have to go even higher for the next rung on the ladder.
You're listening to the Positively Living Podcast. I'm your host, Lisa Zawrotny, founder of Positively Productive Systems and a coach certified in time and stress management, helping clients make space for what matters most in their lives. Join me each episode and we'll talk about decluttering, stress management, habits, personalized productivity, gratitude, and so much more. I understand the overwhelm of life because I'm a wife, mom to kids and cats, and a former caregiver. I'm here to help you choose what's right for you so you can do less, live more, and breathe easier. Sound good? Let's get to it. Welcome to the Positively Living Podcast. I'm your host, Lisa, and I'm most definitely a jack of all trades. Are you too? Today's episode helps you understand why those who identify as multi-passionates, multi-potentialates, polymaths, scanners, the ones who have broad knowledge and a desire to broaden it even more, have a greater potential for success than they realize. The original saying, jack of all trades, was deemed a compliment for a person with good broad knowledge and the ability to master integration of disciplines. I love this description because it's so positive, and I feel like it describes what works for me as a coach. My varied experiences continually support my clients in many ways. Over time, the phrase was added to in a less than positive light, changing it to jack of all trades, master of none. The third part, but oftentimes better than a master of one, seems to have been added in the 21st century, which makes me think some polymaths were working on getting some better press. The saying varies in length and intent, depending upon the context and opinion, but this episode aims to debunk the negative. Today, our featured jack of all trades, Mike Montague, helps us understand the benefits of the multi-passionate life and how your vast experience can be a path to success. Mike is a game show host, motivational speaker, podcaster, and writer. With his Playful Humans podcast, he helps adults rediscover the power of play to find more fun, flow, and fulfillment in their lives and businesses. He's also been a radio DJ, karaoke host, and MC, as well as a social media expert for Sandler Training. In our conversation, we cover what our experiences have been exploring different careers and hobbies, why as a society we hesitate to do so, and the long list of benefits it has for us personally and professionally. Mike shares how he stepped back from burnout and moved forward with play, and he gives us 2 simple steps for how to embrace the benefits. There are some phenomenal surprises in this conversation, not the least of which is Mike's story about getting fired by Billy Idol and how that affected his confidence. You'll want to listen for that and for Mike's unusual but awesome book recommendation at the end. A quick reminder before we join Mike. When you hear references to books and apps on the podcast, I include them in the show notes and in a full list on my website at positivelyproductive.com/resources. You'll find lists and links and access to the free resources library there. And all of these resources are included in one place in the resources vault. That includes additional support and training in the form of short videos and workbooks. You can go to positivelyproductive.com/vault and use the promo code podcast for a very special listener discount. Welcome, Mike Montague, to the Positively Living Podcast. I'm excited to chat with you today.
I'm so excited to be here. Obviously, I'm trying to, stay positive and productive. And so I'm all about what you're doing.
Yeah, and we have a lot in common, but the focus that we have today is like one of my favorite topics, especially featured for this month, talking about living a multi-passionate life. But before we get into it, I'd love it if you'd share a bit about who you are, who you help, what makes you light up.
My name is Mike Montague, and as you mentioned with the multi-hyphenate, I have been a radio DJ, a live DJ, karaoke host. I've opened for Billy Idol and Frankie Valli on stage. I've designed over 200 websites in my life, and so I've kind of an internet nerd too. And I've spent over 12 years as a sales trainer. So those are kind of the three big buckets. And really, what makes me come alive and feel most myself is being behind a microphone, whether that's for free and just having fun and doing my own podcasts and loving life, or it's getting paid, thousands of dollars per hour to do something that is for a large group or a corporation. All of that is gravy for me. I treat them all the same. I would do that for fun. But I say all of that to say that really my life is about being a creative nerd. That's the brand that I have. So there are people, and then you can see behind me things like Steve Martin or the Bare Naked Ladies or writers like Douglas Adams or Dave Barry that are clearly very intelligent people, but they're also very silly people at the same time. And I think that's really what we're going to talk about today is those don't have to be mutually exclusive, that you can have fun and you can still be really productive. You can be playful and still be really serious with what you do for your career or get big time results. And I think a lot of people miss that. I think there are some counterintuitive things just about life, but there's also a lot of bad advice in our culture that feel like you have to work hard, burn out, and stress yourself out in order to reach the top. And I don't think that's true.
Man, say it louder for the people in the back, right? And I think that feeling like you must be one way somehow translated into the you must choose one thing, and it keeps limiting us. So in a nod to Douglas Adams, we will be coming up with 42 reasons why it's great to no, I'm kidding. We're not
I actually just did that. I turned 43, so I did 43 reasons to be more playful, or things that I've learned along the way. I did 42 last year. That was my lucky year for Douglas Adams.
Yes.
But I thought you were going to go the other way because he has 6 books in the Hitchhiker trilogy.
Right.
So, even in a trilogy, you don't have to stick to 3 things.
Let's dig into this idea of being a jack of all trades. And I remember when you and I first connected, I just loved the question you asked, which is, who told you you had to have one job? And I laugh because then I'm thinking about the memes with like, you had one job. And I'm like, maybe that's the reason we shouldn't. But tell me your perspective on this and your experience personally.
Yeah, I think the thing that most people miss that's a little counterintuitive is you would think that if you did one thing, you would get better at it. And we kind of hear this jack of all trades, master of none part. But what people don't hear is the second part of that quote, which is oftentimes better than a master of one. So what I found in my career, and I learned it very young actually, is that I was good in school. I was gifted with computers. I was a little bit of a math nerd. I got a 36 on my ACTs and stuff, and definitely was a nerd. But I also played a ton of sports, and my dad was our basketball coach, and I had a really great soccer coach, and loved playing with my friends and being an athlete. And normally the nerds and the athletes are not in the same group. There's not a huge Venn diagram of that. So in high school, I think I was the only mathlete that was also a varsity athlete. But I knew from a very young age that could be true. And my parents never made me pick anything. They kind of said like, well, there's a time and a place for everything. So I could be a Boy Scout and be doing soccer and be doing something else at home or getting good grades. And that wasn't ever a thing to pick one. So I really credit my parents for that. But as I grew older, I realized that that's actually a competitive advantage. So once I got to college and it started getting to be that point where you're competing for things, or I actually was a pledge class president in my fraternity. And I remember that my pitch was, look, you got guys here that are better athletes than me. You got guys that are better looking. They'll represent the fraternity better, or they're smarter and they're going to get better grades. But there's nobody in this group that is going to beat me at all 4 of those things. that if you tallied up all of those, my collective score is going to be higher because that's just who I am. So I can get good grades. I can represent myself respectfully and be a gentleman, and I can be an athlete. And that puts me oftentimes in a better position than other people. And I see that with my career now. Some people have designed websites, some people are performers, and some people have a thought leadership, credibility, or expertise in one area. But very few people have all three of those things. And I'll give you a hint. I make the salary of about what all three of those things combined would make. So I don't make less for doing more things. I make more for having more tools.
We need to come back to that. I remember you telling me about that as well. And I was like, this is intriguing. So I want to highlight, I love doing this auditory highlight. Imagine, if you will, I'm grabbing a highlighter and I'm like, listen to what Mike said. Okay, so I'm thinking, don't make me choose. And you credit your parents for not making you choose. And interestingly, my experience was very similar. You know, I had a varsity letter, I was a band geek, I was a Regents scholar. So it was a big mix. And I've always had this cross training idea. But the phrase that you said, and I love it from a productivity lens, is there's a time and place for everything. That is a permission packed statement, right? Because it's giving you permission for the everything, but it's also reminding you, we didn't say do it all at one time, you know, but that you don't have to choose. It's intentional placement and it's how it works together. Before we dig into these extreme benefits, what is it that's happening that you see that's making us limit ourselves instead? You experienced this from a young age, which is awesome. Same for me. We are like up here on our soapbox together, shouting it from the rooftops. What's the limitation? Why are we limiting ourselves?
I think it's other people's benefit for us. So, what a lot of people don't realize is that even the educational system was developed in a time of the industrial age where they needed humans to be machines. Mm-hmm. So they really, that you had one job, meme that you mentioned, is they were a machine. You had one job to work the line and screw in this bolt in the Ford factory. And I don't need you to be multi-hyphenate. I don't need you to be creative. I don't need you to come up with better ways to do that. We can hire other people to do that. I need you to take this thing and move it here, or to do this and follow the instructions. And so we spent close to 100 years training people to follow instructions and rewarding from that. And they said, if you just do this for 40 years, you can retire, you'll have a really good life, we'll take care of you. But we just need you to be a machine, a cog in this wheel, to keep the wheels of industry rolling. Right. And what happened then is we developed computers and machines who can actually be machines. And it wasn't ever very healthy for humans. It wasn't ever our best, highest purpose to work in a factory or a mine or anything else that was being a machine. We have more intelligence, creativity, human connection. We deal with confidence. We physically break down and other things that machines don't do. So now when we get to this modern economy where those manufacturing jobs and things are being replaced by machines, and even people, I forget the term that they call it now, but there's a lot of like pointless jobs, if they're not physical. So I gave you the physical machine thing, but there's also a ton of people in office jobs that are essentially processing machines. And so they're moving paper from one place to another in the 80s, 90s. Now they're sending an email from one person to another and they're facilitating meetings. And we're not really actually adding anything to the company except for they're keeping things moving. And I don't mean that in a disparaging way to anybody. Everybody has a job. And if you love it, do that, do your thing. If you don't love it, think about why the company needs you to believe that that's valuable and that you're making them more money and you're keeping their machine going, but they don't really care about keeping your machine running or how great you feel about it or how much energy it gives you and fulfillment and happiness. So none of those things that were promised in like the American dream are always at the end. And so it's like this cookie, right? That if you just slave away and work really hard and you grind for 60 hours a week, and in the startup culture and stuff, it's that way too, right? If you just put in 80 hours a week, you don't sleep, someday you can be a billionaire and be a unicorn like Mark Zuckerberg. And what we find is even those people keep going because they don't know what else to do. So Mark Zuckerberg and Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk, they're going to space and they're creating bigger things for them to do because they don't feel like enough by themselves. They haven't come up with anything better. What I found is like, even when you look at billionaires' houses and stuff, they are really not that different than your house. It's just more of the same things. Like humans aren't that creative when they're like, what makes them happy? Well, we want a theater room in the basement and a pool outside. And then we have 12 other rooms that we never go in, and we have 6 kitchens. It's like, well, do you really need more than one kitchen at a time? Like what could possibly happen? You can't drive more than one car at a time. So,
Mhm.
the people that have like garages full of 87 different cars, that might make you feel nice and you can, treat them like clothes and match your outfit and stuff, but you can't drive more than one at a time. And so I think we get hung up with all of the stuff that other people think we should do or that was generated for them. Like the media and the government and big business wants you to keep making more money and keep spending more money and to keep ratcheting this thing up. But none of that says you'll be happier. You won't actually be happier when you ratchet it up a notch. You just have to go even higher for the next rung on the ladder.
Exactly. So, a couple things that are really important that you're saying here that I want to pull out. Okay. So, first of all, it's the idea of being a cog in the wheel. And this goes back to what I'm constantly on about, which is self awareness, right? Like, so it's not just self awareness, like, how do I feel? What do I like? Because we so rarely say, am I happy doing this? Am I content? Do I like this? Does it feel like I'm using my strengths? And by the way, all of that relates back to being truly productive. So you're asking yourself that, but self awareness is also am I in relation to everyone around me? How am I being used? How am I being treated? And am I satisfied with that? And as you said, this is so important, if you are a cog in a wheel of the corporate world and you are happy, you do you, boo. You just keep on trucking. But if you're not, that's where this conversation comes in and gives you that moment to say, yeah, okay, but now what?
Yeah, I think most people do get burned out at some point. And even if you're
Yeah.
doing what you love, and I think that's what people miss too. We mentioned that everything has its time and places. When you take something you love and you start getting paid for it, it turns it into a job. And that means you can get burned out at it. So I think even when you do things that you love, people always say, find what you love and you'll never work another day in your life. And I find that to not be true at all. That
Mhm.
there are still times of the year where you have to pay your taxes, or days where you don't feel like it, or you get a client that wasn't a really great fit, or there was a miscommunication about something and you're frustrated. And so I don't mean 100% of the time you should love it, but I do think most of the time you should feel fulfilled and excited about what you're doing, and then realize when you're not so you can adjust.
Yeah, that fulfillment that you're talking about is, when you say, you have a why and you let that drive you, right? Start with your why and you have that fulfillment. That's actually what gets you through those harder days. As opposed to feeling burnt out, it's what's like, okay, I'm going to be resilient. I'm going to put up with this. I can get through it because you have that fulfillment. I think there's a lot of distinctions there.
It's okay to go through periods, and some of those are even long ones. Like you said, you can push through it, maybe a week or a month or a quarter, that you're
Yeah.
like, man, I just don't have it, or this is harder than it should be, and you're stuck for some reason. That, I think, even that's okay. But I found myself in my life getting to the point where I couldn't even remember the last great day that I had, where it was like, oh, I needed something to like wake me up and be like, oh, you used to love this. And so for me, it was a play activity where I went out and was having a great day with my friends, and it was the pool, and we were playing water volleyball. And I just had this realization of like those endorphins and emotions coming, and I was really truly happy in that moment. And I thought, holy crap, I used to feel like this all of the time. This wasn't like a rare occasion on a vacation where I could feel like this for 30 minutes. It was like I would feel like this all the time. And that's where I really started readjusting stuff of like, let me get rid of any kind of drugs and alcohol, including caffeine and other stuff. And like, let me get back to baseline, like, who am I and how do I feel? And reevaluate what I'm doing, taking a digital detox and turning off social media and all kinds of stuff to just reset and be like, whoa, I added a lot of stuff as I was growing through my, 20s and 30s. Let me take this back down, kind of like a house remodel. Let me tear it down to the studs. Let me see what's actually important. What do I really have underneath all of this? And then I can rebuild and add back what I want in my life. And I think that was a big turning point for me when I realized that.
Oh man, you are talking my language about decluttering, like whole life decluttering. Okay, so you have just given us the steps that we're going to take. Let's back up real quick because I'd love for you to dig into that benefits part. So we talked about why we've been limited and just starting to be aware of where we are, what cog are we in what machine. Are we satisfied? Starting to ask those questions, but let's remind ourselves of the benefits of exploring those different passions, becoming the multi-passionate, multi-hyphenate, having the slash careers, your experience, that power of three that you were talking about.
Yeah, I am working on a book on this, but I've posted some blogs and talk about this on my podcast a lot. I think there's five main things. I call them the five CCs of fun: confidence, creativity, connections with other human beings, a larger overall culture with humans in a group, and then conditioning, physical and mental conditioning. And so you mentioned CrossFit earlier. We can start with the last one there. The conditioning is pretty obvious. If you're doing multiple things, you're making different connections in your brain. They've done MRIs and studies where they show that like people who do multiple things create these crazy connections, where people that do one thing, you wear like a really deep groove in that one area so you can create great muscle memory, but it doesn't allow for working around obstacles and roadblocks. So when you find that person that's really good at one thing, if that one thing doesn't go smooth and they get a red light somewhere, they don't have the creative juices to get around it. So creativity was the second one we can talk about. Is that I love this stat: 97% of people, when they run into an obstacle, do one of two things: more of what they were currently doing or less of what they were currently doing. Only 3% of people try something else, because we've all worn that groove so thin that we're like, okay, if every time I get hungry, I swing through McDonald's and I get hungry, my choice is to go to McDonald's more. And like, that's not making me feel good. I go to McDonald's more, I go to McDonald's less. We don't think maybe we should have a salad or a smoothie or something else and like change what we're eating. So when we start running into challenges, we do more or less of what we're currently doing. Creativity, when you're doing other things, you create these connections with other parts and see more opportunities than people who are not creative. So I think that's a huge thing. The other one that goes along with it personally is the confidence. So most people think confidence comes from winning and from finding success. But what they found is that the opposite is actually true. And I know this was for me in my life. Is you become more confident when you overcome challenges. When you fail and you survive, that's when you become more confident. So this is where I get to tell my favorite story of all time. I was fired live on stage by Billy Idol in front of thousands of people, and it was probably the worst moment of my performing career. I didn't do anything wrong. They said, play rock music, don't play any Billy Idol songs, and I could play the retro stuff that I played at the radio station and my normal set. So I was doing that. The audience is Billy Idol in the 2000s. It's all soccer moms. I was like, these are my people. I got this. So I'm playing Jesse's Girl and 867-5309 and all the great hits. And the manager comes out and goes, we said play rock music like the Rolling Stones. And that's when I panicked, because as a club DJ in the 2000s with no Wi-Fi, I only had the music I brought. And there's not too many rock songs you can dance to. It's You Shook Me All Night Long and Pour Some Sugar on Me. And that's about it. So I played those two. And then I was like, all right, I played some rock songs. I can get back to some retro. And I started another song and the lights came down and I got fired. And I collected my equipment. I did not pass go, slinked out the back, did not collect $200. But that was the moment that I became bulletproof as a performer. Nothing can happen on this podcast that's worse than that. I got extreme confidence from that because I was the only person at the radio station who was willing to do it. And I knew I had just learned so much and I had built up like so much tolerance and a thick skin that I had this physical and mental conditioning now to get over whatever I needed to in any other performance. So I've done shows on 9/11. I've been maced by police during a show because there was a fight. all kinds of crazy things happening that now it's like, oh, okay, well, I got this. Connections with other human beings. When you do more things, especially when you do them with others, you create opportunities for yourself that you wouldn't have gotten because of these connections. So if I only know people in my industry or in my office, or I'm working from home and I'm not meeting anybody new, my options and inputs are limited. But when I do multiple things, I meet people hosting a game show. I meet people doing sales training. I meet, people online doing my podcast. I've interviewed over 600 different people that I can now reach out to and say, hey, remember me? Or I can follow them on social media and say, hey, you're doing this cool thing. Can I be a part of it? And all of that creates better connections with humans individually, but also a selfish benefit of it. And then finally, I would say the culture. I think when you develop a culture of playfulness, it's just more fun and you get to attract other people who are playful. Where if you're working and you're stressed out and you're burned out, you attract other people who are working too hard, burned out and stressed out and angry and snippy. And so I would much rather work and be around people that are playful and doing multiple things and being creative than people who are not.
To quote the inimitable Jeff Harry, preach.
Love Jeff. He's been on my podcast and stuff too. It's such a great dude. And how you get to meet people like that, right? And he introduces you to 100 other playful people that he's met. And that's exactly what I'm talking about that. And then you all of a sudden have this culture of you're surrounded by fun, playful people, and the world becomes a lot nicer place.
What you focus on, you fuel. This is why I coach gratitude. And I remember the first time as a productivity coach, I'm like, okay, I know you expect me to be talking about planners and time blocking and stuff because we're talking productivity, but bear with me. Let's talk about the habit of gratitude. And, because what you focus on, you fuel. And then the other thing that you're talking about with like choosing the 97% stat that you offered. Yeah. And I'm cracking up because again, connecting it back to my lens of productivity, when you replace a habit, instead of, okay, you're stopping the habit or you're going to continue the habit, or when you replace it, that's the key, because trying to put the brakes on something or modify it, that is very difficult for our brains to accept. But if you're like, oh, we're going here instead of there now. Oh, okay. Because you're like, I still want to be doing something. Like you said, going through the drive-through. Now we're going through the drive-through of someplace else, or now we're going in this direction. And the grooves that you're talking about in our brains, all of this is habit-based. But there's so many good things here. But I'm most fascinated by the confidence idea, the concept of resilience and overcoming. And again, so much of this is counterintuitive. So I think that's a big step for us to take, is to walk away saying, okay, I've been thinking about it this way, and it may feel counterintuitive, but really this is what's going to get me places. And everything that you're talking about with the 5 CCs, to me, I think about, right, like you said, CrossFit, cross training. And I've talked about this with my son, who's a musician. And I'm like, listen, I know that you love to play by ear and you love to play this particular music, but I still want you to learn how to read music. And I also want you to play, and he's really great about playing different styles of music. And then every time there's an opportunity, there's an open mic or something. He went to an orchestral thing one time, to speak to someone. And then he went to a jazz open mic. And it's like, each time you do that, you meet mentors, you meet people who can bring something new. It's the classic, you don't know what you don't know. And the more that you expand and follow those passions, those interests, and stay open to the play and the learning, man, the sky's the limit.
Yeah, it's so huge. And I wanted to highlight what you said about the resilience, because again, I think people think that if I get really good and I'm really focused, I'll be more resilient, I'll be more likely to succeed. But what we found is the opposite is true, that because of those other opportunities, or I've never had less than 2 jobs in my life. Right. So if I lose one of them, I'm only losing a percentage of my income, not all of my income. So especially when I was in radio and doing websites, if I was working a lot and doing what I love and doing a ton of performances, I would not do as much computer work. Or when I was needed more computer work or web design stuff, I could go do that and I would tone down other stuff. But I also always kind of found there were like these different tanks inside of me are batteries that if I run down one battery too much, then I can only do so much of that. And I can recharge it by going and doing a different thing. And it creates a different sort of energy resilience for me. And then I think the third thing is those connections. The wider my connections are and the more opportunities I get, the more resilient I am. Because now, like where I am, I mentioned the 600 people that I've interviewed in sales and leadership and play professionals, is that if I needed another opportunity or if I needed help, I now have 600 people that I can call for anything. And chances are a lot better that I have that than if I had these really deep, narrow focus networks. And even studies from LinkedIn, I wrote a book on LinkedIn. They show that the best networks and the most powerful people have like 250 connections that they leverage and that they know. They're not really wide and shallow, but they're not really narrow and deep either. You're kind of in the middle here. And people, I get humans don't like ambiguity, but the more you get used to that, the more you get comfortable with uncertainty, the more you can deal with uncertainty. So when a pandemic or something else comes up you didn't plan for, you're already built and conditioned to deal with those things.
It's so true that the two words that are just popping up huge in this entire conversation is flexibility and opportunity.
Yeah.
That's just what's calling to me. So with that in mind, now we know what the benefits are. Thank you for that. I knew inherently, but I'm like, let's just be very clear. There are a lot of benefits. And something you described before so beautifully was what you did to kind of say, okay, let me take a step back. Let me literally do a personal detox. So given that, would you say the best next step as we're like, okay, it's time for me to be more open to play and to my potential multi-passionateness? What are we doing next, Mike?
I think this is where it ties in to what you do. There are two things I think that are the biggest things you can do to release the valve of all of the pressure. Number one, you mentioned like decluttering and stuff. And I love when people say that, like, I have these like project managers and things that love to schedule everything down to the minute. And they're like, oh, I'm so super organized. And Mike, you're chaotic. You know, you don't fill out the spreadsheets and stuff, or you don't keep everything as tight a schedule. But I know I have slack in the system so that if something goes wrong, I can still hit my deadline. I can still do that. So I think number one is create slack in the system. Like, just take the pressure off. Every minute doesn't need to be productive. Every hour doesn't need to be accounted for. Create some space first. And then the second thing is, don't forget about the stuff that you love to do. So I always say, like, instead of the to-do list, create like a ta-da list of like, this is some magic I'm going to create in my life. Or this one is for me that, like, I'm just going to make some space. I got a new Lego for my birthday, so I haven't made space for it yet, but I'm going to find some time this weekend to just do something that I love because I love doing it. And don't worry about anything else. Don't try to monetize it. Don't try to impress somebody with it. Don't share it on social media. Don't try to sell it. Like, just give yourself permission to do something for you because you love it. And then that will give you space and energy to deal with some of these other things. You can go from there.
That's energy management right there. Yes. Okay. Decluttering just overall. So what you're saying is to put slack in the system, and I call it creating buffer, whatever you want to call it. It's space. It's creating space for that flexibility, for that breathing, for things that you don't think about. When you create a task to do, it's imperative that you think about all the elements of that task. And many times that includes getting ready for it, transitioning out of the last thing you did. It's all about where your energy is going. So I love that one. And then the ta-da list. Oh man, that's going on my whiteboard.
Yeah.
I already love the to-do list idea that we get carried away when we're just like, there's all the things to do, right? And I'm like, no, you can put it all down because you need to get it out of your head, but that's not your to-do list. It's your to-choose list.
Yeah. I love
But
that.
what you're talking about with the ta-da is the don't forget when you're choosing. It's not all work here. It's also the play that's imperative, that the things that you love, and for no other reason. Although I do have to ask, if it's not on Instagram, did it happen?
Yes, a lot
Asking
of
for a
people
friend.
don't think it does, right? Yeah, I think those are some of the really hard ones. I love what you highlighted there. I wanted to add one more thing,
Yeah.
which is it's called the backwards law. This is actually a psychological principle that there are some things in our life that the harder we try to do them, the less likely they are to happen. So think about falling asleep. We've all had that big presentation the next day or something, and it's impossible to fall asleep because we want to so bad. Or making somebody fall in love with you. The more you try, the less likely that is to happen, because you're going to be appearing more desperate than you are attractive.
Yep.
And so what happens is a lot more things in our life are like that. We think that the harder we work, the more likely we are to do them. But with creativity, with happiness, with playfulness, we've all had that night, right? Where it's like New Year's Eve and tonight has to be the best night ever, or it's a first date or something. And it's less likely because the expectations are so high that you actually enjoy it. So it sounds weird. It sounds counterintuitive, but when you create that slack, when you lower the stress and the pressure of it having to be something, they actually increase the chances that it is productive, that it is happy, that it is playful and fulfilling when you do that. So
100%.
it sounds weird, but it is really fun. Yeah.
It works. I can vouch for it. Okay. I think that's a fantastic place for us to wrap up and let everyone step away, try creating that Slack, keeping that to-do list going, and just, oh man, taking some of that pressure off. It's going to work wonders, I promise. Tell everybody where we can find you to hang out with you, because it's going to be fun.
Playfulhumans.com. There is a club of other adults rediscovering the power of play there. There's a fun playfulness quiz, so you can take a BuzzFeed style quiz and find out maybe what your passion and fulfilling activities would be. So I recommend starting there. And then you're listening to a podcast right now. So if you wanted to find Playful Humans wherever you're listening to this one, that would be great too. I interview people that play for a living, things like magicians and jugglers and Instagram comedians I interviewed this morning, or artists and creators and writers and tattoo artists, all kinds of people that are really loving doing what they do for a living.
Love that. Yeah, I'll have all the links in the show notes. And now let's have a little bonus fun with the rapid wrap up, shall we?
Oh, let's do it. I love to play a game.
Yeah, so filling in the blanks for me, please. First of all, the song that lifts my spirits, makes me dance.
Oh, I have so many. I can only pick one.
I know, isn't that awful?
Like Wham, Wake Me Up Before You Go Go. I'll dance to that every time.
Yeah, I'm totally fine with not just picking one. I loathe when people ask me that, but I just wanted to see which was the first one that would come up for you.
But Walking on Sunshine or anything by the Bare Naked Ladies usually puts me in a good mood too.
Okay. And I have a Spotify playlist. Actually, I have like 3 volumes now from the Positively Living podcast guests choosing their fun songs. So maybe I'll add probably Wham and Walking on Sunshine to, I think it's volume 3. Maybe we're into volume 4, but look for that on Spotify. Okay. Now, how about a quote or a mantra that inspires me that I love to share?
Ooh, I have a ton of these too. I'm going to go with my favorite here, which is Steve Martin and his quote, "Be so good they can't ignore you." That's one of my all-time favorites. A lot of people sit around and wait to be picked, or they're afraid to do what they do because they won't get that opportunity, or they won't find the success that they want. But it really is, if you really want something and you want to be good, like, don't sit back and say, when will somebody notice me? Ask yourself, when will I do something worthy of being noticed? That's huge.
That's good. And I love me some Steve Martin. Okay. And how about a resource, a book or app besides the Playful Humans podcast, obviously, that's made my life better? And it doesn't have to relate to what we said today, but it could. Just anything along those lines that's made your life better.
I'm going to stick with my theme of going for my people I shouted out at the beginning. We're just going to bring it all full circle. Has nothing to do with self-help or productivity, but read Douglas Adams, Dirk Gently's Holistic Detective Agency.
Yes.
It's like a Seinfeld episode in a book. And I've never read anything like it, but it will make your life better for about 3 hours. How about that?
Yeah, absolutely. 100%. Okay. And last, but definitely not least, what are you grateful for today, Mike?
Ooh, I am grateful for my health. I had a ton of fun down at the Lake of the Ozarks this weekend, and I was definitely sore and paying the price. But today I got out of bed and I was like, you know what? I can do this. I'm back at it. I recovered and I'm very healthy and happy to be that way.
Well, I am most certainly grateful for you, grateful that we connected through other playful humans. And I want to thank you, Mike, for shining your light in this world and for sharing it with us today.
Thanks for having me on. I love what you're doing, and I'm going to go check out that Spotify playlist.
Thank you for joining me today. Your time is precious and limited, and I'm honored you chose to spend it with me. If you have feedback, questions, or want to schedule a chat, head to positivelyproductive.com/connect. And if you are looking for any of the resources referenced on the podcast, from books to products to training and more, go to positivelyproductive.com/resources.